Hey guys, how you doing? Welcome back to my Characters Explained series, a series where I cover characters from the game Battle for Neighborville. And in today's video, we will be taking a second look at a character I didn't do enough justice for last time, that being Electric Slide. So without any further ado, let's get right into it. So, like with my other recent Characters Explained videos, this video is a remake of an old upload of mine. Here, I'm basically just correcting information on Slide that I got wrong the first time around, as well as giving more insight into the character herself. This time, I actually have a lot more experience with Slide, so I can actually properly cover her. With that being said, expect to hear similar points I made in that old video, but also new ones here and there too. Now, normally we would start off by covering the character's background, but Slide doesn't really have one. She's a completely original character made for BFN, and unlike other BFN creations, she wasn't added to any other game. Well, I suppose that makes our lives easier here. So let's move on to her basic stats. Slide has 125 HP, and her primary, the Boogie Bolt, deals 14.9 damage on a normal hit and 18 as a crit. She also has 18 ammo, and her rate of fire is 190. Very simple stuff here. She's quite a straightforward character. Mostly. She does have one property that separates her from the rest of the cast, and that is her arcing damage. Basically, her primary can actually damage multiple targets if her main target is near their teammates. This arc damage is a flat 14 on a target if it hits, and it can connect to 2 extra people. So if a group of, say, 3 sunflowers are all connected, you can constantly do damage to all 3 of them. This primary also has another property that allows it to briefly stun any enemy that's hit with it consistently. This stun hits twice per ammo magazine if you're constantly hitting an enemy, and the stun itself briefly locks the enemies hit with it from using abilities in their primary. So Slide is one of those characters that reward you for having good aim, as even missing one shot on an enemy will affect how that stun works. Now, all of this shows us that Slide can be very deadly if used for crowd control, and her abilities only confirm this primary usage, starting with Funky Bouncer. This ability allows Slide to essentially throw enemies off of her if she needs them to back off, as it lifts any enemy it catches in the air and bounces them around for a few seconds. When you're in this ability as a plant, you can't really get out of it unless you already have a movement ability primed up, and even then it's not consistent. You do leave it no matter what when the duration runs out, but even still, this is a pretty good way to basically force enemies out of fights. Oh, and if you use this ability properly, you can even get something like this to happen. Yeah, that is something I actually pulled off on PC. Overall, I think this ability is pretty good, and it's helpful for repositioning the enemies you don't particularly want to deal with. Next up is Out of Fight, which if you've ever played against an annoying scientist in the Garden Warfare games, you may have bad flashbacks on this one because it's just energy warp. The ability briefly makes Electric Slide immune to all damage but out of map hazards, but to compensate, you can't use anything in your kit, your natural health regen is stopped, and you can't run. So you're kind of just sitting there. This ability is good, I'm not gonna knock it or anything, but I will say that it's pretty basic, so I can't say much more about it. Finally, we have Disco Tornado, which is honestly her best ability if you ask me. What it does is simple. Slide launches a tornado that, when activated, will do a constant stream of damage to whatever is in it. It may not seem very practical, but this ability hits everything, including acorns on oaks, potato mines, and more. Anything that can be destroyed will be destroyed by this thing. The damage is so good that honestly, I would say this is easily her best utility for breaking down tough opponents. I love this thing, it's very useful. So overall, Slide has a pretty interesting kit, all things considered. I wouldn't say she's incredibly busted, but she isn't nearly as weak as some people claim she is either. And for more proof on that front, let's next cover her abilities. So this is the part of the video where I cover a character's upgrades. And before we do get into this section, I want to real quick clarify that this time around, I actually do understand almost all of her upgrades here. In the first Slide video, I didn't understand a couple of them because I also didn't understand her stunning gimmick very well. But now I can finally give a good explanation on how these upgrades and more work. So let's get right into it. We'll start with her basic kit upgrades, and the first of this bunch is Malfunction. This upgrade basically makes Slide's reload a weapon, as as now a damage burst appears around Slide whenever she reloads. It does 35 damage, and honestly, it's not bad. I think in the right situations, that little bit of extra damage can turn the tide of a fight very quickly, and for that reason alone, I'd say it's good. Next up is Jumper Cables and Chain Lightning, which both do similar yet different things to your primary's arcing gimmick. Jumper Cables increases the range that the arc can connect, and Chain Lightning connects to an additional target. Now, if you ask me, the better choice here is easily Chain Lightning, as it allows you to essentially damage a third or more of the enemy team if they're all grouped up on, say, a payload. This just comes in handy way more often. But because Chain Lightning is more useful, that doesn't mean that Jumper Cables is useless. They're both pretty good, though I do believe that one is better than the other. Finally, we have Jazz Hands, and oh boy, this one sucks. So this upgrade claims that it boosts the amount of times that Electric Slide stuns with her primary. Now, that's all fine and dandy, but it doesn't work. And keep in mind, last time I made a similar claim, but I didn't test it thoroughly. This time I did, and yep, it's completely pointless. So don't use this upgrade at all. Unless I'm also wrong on this one, there is little to no changes here. Next up, we have Slide's ability upgrades. So let's start with her funky bouncer ones. Up first, we have Amplification, which allows you to capture enemies with this ability from farther distances. There's not much to this one, it only costs 2 points, so really there's not a lot more that I can add here. As for her other upgrade, it's Conduction. This upgrade lowers the cooldown on Disco Tornado by around 2.5 seconds for every enemy captured in Funky Bouncer. This one is gimmicky, like really gimmicky, but it's still not bad. I think if it's used really effectively, you can essentially use Disco Tornado twice in a row. But really, this is just a situational version of another upgrade we'll get to soon, so I wouldn't really recommend this one. Next, we have her out of fight upgrades, and I'll be honest, these kinda stink. Starting with Maelstrom, this upgrade boosts Disco Tornado's damage whenever Slide is sitting in out of fight and inside the radius of the tornado. At least, that's what I think it does. This is a first in this series, but I do not understand this upgrade. It is weird. I think it does buff some damage, but I could barely notice it. So ignore this upgrade, honestly. As for Defibrillated, this upgrade reloads your primary and basically heals you to full health whenever you enter out of fight. Now, this is undeniably good, but the cost is 4 points. There's simply better options for less points, and asking the player to dedicate over half of their upgrade free space to this is overkill. Overall, I don't think either upgrade is all that good, but they still have their uses, I suppose. Finally, we move on to the Disco Tornado upgrades, and even here, we're starting with quite a gimmicky one. Turbulence stuns enemies in Disco Tornado every once in a while, which is neat. It's not very consistent, but what is consistent is that you can get stunned in both the Tornado and the Detonated Tornado too, which is fine enough, I suppose. The other upgrade is Cooling Sparks, which reduces the cooldown time on Disco Tornado by almost 8 seconds for every enemy you eliminate with it. This one is really powerful, and I would easily recommend it. So that's all of Slide's upgrades. I'm not gonna lie, a lot of them are either gimmicky or just simply broken, which kinda stinks, but luckily there is enough here for us to make some example builds. So let's get right into that next. Up first is my personal build, that being Cooling Sparks, Chain Lightning, and Refreshing Revive. There's not too much here to discuss, as everything basically connects together to make Slide a powerful crowd controller. Next up is a ranged control build, using Jumper Cables, Amplification, and Malfunction. The first two upgrades make it so that Slide can do a little more damage against enemies that aren't as grouped up as you'd like them to be. And as for Malfunction, this is just here for the close range fights that might give you a bit of a scare. Finally, we have the Ultimate Wuss build, using Defibrillated and Critical Blow. Yeah, I don't think this one needs much of an explanation, it's just here to be funny mostly. So overall, now that we've covered everything with Slide, what are my final thoughts on her? Well, despite her strange kit and even stranger upgrades, I think she's really good. Sure, she's not like the best 1v1 character, but she doesn't need to be in a game like BFN where stacking 4 sunflowers and 8 citrons is a perfectly viable strategy. She's useful in quite a few situations. And with that being said, I'm gonna go ahead and end this video here. Thank you all so much for watching until the end, I really do appreciate it. This video will be, for now, the final remake video I work on. Maybe once I finish the 80s video, we'll do a couple more, but until then, I want to focus on other projects. But with that being said, if you're new around here and you like what you see, then subscribe. It helps me out a ton, and you get to see this type of content in the future. As for me, I'm gonna go ahead and stun people with Slide's primary, so I guess I'll see you guys in my next video. Peace.